Hi, thank you for joining us for tonight's event. My name is Jill Owensley, and I'm a marketing manager here at Powell's Books. Before we begin, I wanted to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. In the coming weeks, we're looking forward to welcoming Kate Green on July 30th, Steve Olson on August 3rd, and Molly Weisenberg on August 5th, among others. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. As well, if you haven't already done so, you can sign up for our weekly events email at powells.com. Tonight, we're so honored to welcome Miriam Feldman in conversation with Lidia Yuknavitch. Miriam Feldman is an artist, writer, and mental health activist who splits her time between her Los Angeles studio and her farm in rural Washington state. She's been married to her husband, Craig O'Rourke, also an artist, for 34 years, and they have 4 adult children. Their 33-year-old son, Nick, has schizophrenia. When Nick was diagnosed in 2004, Miriam became an activist and a writer. With firsthand knowledge of our mental health system, she decided to be an advocate for those who have no voice. Her memoir, He Came In With It, A Portrait of Motherhood and Madness, chronicles how Miriam and her family learned to navigate everyday life with her son's schizophrenia, her tireless search for help and answers, her feelings of shame and overwhelm, insights she gleaned, and lessons she learned about the ongoing struggle our nation has with mental health care. He Came In With It exposes the shocking shortfalls of our mental health system, the destructive impact of stigma, shame, and isolation, and finally, the fact that there is no such thing as a perfect family. Lidia Yuknavitch is the best-selling author of the novels The Book of Joan, The Small Backs of Children, Dora, A Head Case, and the memoir The Chronology of Water. She is the recipient of 2 Oregon Book Awards, a Willamette Writers Award, and was a finalist for the 2017 Brooklyn Public Library Literary Prize and the 2012 Penn Center Creative Nonfiction Award. Her most recent book is Verge, a collection of short fiction that one of our booksellers called fierce, elegant, beautifully grotesque, unabashedly sexy, unapologetically brutal. She lives in Portland, Oregon, and is a frequent conversation partner at our events, so we are very happy to welcome her back again this evening. This evening's event will also include a Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, not the chat button, but the Q&A button, if you'd like to ask a question. As well, if someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question. Please consider supporting Miriam Feldman and Powell's by purchasing a copy of He Came In With It. A link to buy the book will be shared in the chat this evening. Without any further ado, please welcome Miriam Feldman and Lidia Yuknavitch.
Hello.
It's my beloved Miriam.
So happy to be here.
We're both thrilled to be here, but I'm here tonight for you, Miriam, my beloved art and heart co-warrior. It's been thrilling to me to have crossed your path. It's been thrilling to me to share in your artwork, and it's been thrilling to me to get to work with you on your amazing writing that who the fuck would have guessed it is coming out of you now, just like all my stuff in life coming out of me when I didn't know it was going to happen. And so we're exactly where we should be, my love. Miriam is going to read to us a little bit first. We know her in our heart circle as Mimi, so you may hear me call her Mimi because I can't help it. So she's going to read to us a little bit first, and then we'll talk a little bit. And meanwhile, the rest of you will be thinking of questions, and I will try so hard to navigate the Q&A box when it's time. So Miriam, my Mimi, take it away.
Thank you, Lydia. Okay, I'm going to read an excerpt that is about the first time that we had to take Nick to be hospitalized. And the only background information that I guess you would need in order to not be confused is that Nick had gone to college, had his first psychotic break, and showed up back at home. And his main delusion in the beginning of his illness was that Bob Dylan was his father, and we had been hiding it from him his whole life. Okay. Nick was sweating profusely, and his eyes were wide enough to see the whites all around. Rimmed in alabaster, the warm brown pupils darkened chillingly. Eyes that had held only goodness before now caused me to take an actual step backward. Okay, that is it, Craig bellowed. You cannot come into this house, destroy things, upset your mother and your sisters, yell all these ridiculous ideas. This is not acceptable. Get out. Get out of my house right now. I didn't know what to do. I just wanted all of this not to be happening. All the days, all the years, all of the running of interference, just to get to the point where he would go to college. My masterpiece of a happy ending was shattering right in front of me. Do what your father says, I said, having run out of cards to play. We all stood there like players in some old Western, staring at each other. I thought back on the day now so long ago, crouching outside of Kaiser with Jenny, the sweet smell of baking bread, when I couldn't summon the courage to have him committed. That day, nobody had stepped up and slapped me across the face shouting, "Wake up." This day, someone did. Lucy. Wait a minute, Mom, Dad, what are you doing? You can't just throw him out of here. Something is really wrong with him. Look at him. He's your son. You need to help him. She spoke with clarity and conviction. Mom, Dad. I want him out of here, Craig said. I will not have this in my house. I looked at Lucy. She looked at me. He needs to go to the hospital, she said. I was hamstrung between my allegiance to my husband and the irrefutable truth of Nick's condition. Come on, Nick, come, and we'll take you. They can help you, I said. Nick refused to go. He wanted to go to Point Doom and find Bob Dylan and get this thing straightened out once and for all. Lucy and I convinced him that we would take him there if he would just stop by Kaiser first. Off we went, leaving Craig and Rose staring at us from the kitchen. I can only imagine what was going on in Rose's head. When I was little, I had an older cousin who would always grab me by the wrists and swing me in a big circle until I was perpendicular to the earth. Everybody would laugh, so I knew it was supposed to be fun. In actuality, it made me nauseated. And when he put me down, I had to stay perfectly still for a minute just to get my bearings. The world around me was spinning and I was afraid to move. That is how I imagined Rose felt standing there in the kitchen. My 15-year-old daughter became my wingman at the first hospitalization of my son. She should not have had to do that. But Craig was paralyzed, Rose was just a little girl, and Nick was on fire. I think I might have died without her. We arrived at the emergency room. I didn't know how to explain the problem. He was acting crazy. Maybe it was drugs. Yes, he'd had psychological problems in the past. Yes, he had seen a psychiatrist. He was delusional. They put Nick in a room with a guard outside as a standard protocol with psych cases. He was not allowed to leave until he was evaluated by a psychiatrist. We waited. Every time I opened my mouth, I began to cry. I couldn't ask a question. I couldn't advocate for my son. I couldn't even say my name. Lucy did everything. I spent most of the time apologizing to her for what was happening. She replied with a short, "Cut it out, Ma. We're a family. We take care of each other. I'm fine." At one point, while we were waiting for the psychiatrist, I was wandering like a bomb blast victim down the hallway. A woman pushing a big shiny cart piled with towels and supplies walked past me. I drifted away. I continued my shell-shocked meandering. A minute later, a supply closet door opened and she pulled me in. "Sit down, honey," she said, turning over a bucket, my makeshift seat. What was going on now? Lucy was out there wrangling the doctors and nurses, and I was sitting in a janitor's closet? "Listen to me. I want to tell you something," she said, looking straight at me. "My husband is like your son. He has the same thing. It is terrible. Those doctors are bastards. They think they are gods. The nurses, they're so overworked they can hardly help. You got to get strong, Mija. You are the mother. Don't let them push you around. I know you want to just cry forever, but you can't." She put her ample arms around me and held me while I sobbed. Then she pulled away and said, "This isn't going to go away. This is it now. Don't waste time wishing it wasn't true." She held both my hands in hers for just a second and then left. It was a big modern hospital. It had recently been remodeled and everything was technologically perfect. The art on the walls was interesting and edgy. The floors were that new fake, better than real wood. Down the hall, my son was tethered to a bed with a jolly guard at the door, waiting for a psychiatrist to decide whether he was nuts or not. All around me were sick people, scared people, busy technicians and healers. Old ladies were wailing. The man in the room adjacent to Nick moaned with a pain I can only imagine. I'm sure someone must have died that night. Blood was everywhere. It pumped through veins and arteries. It lay on smears on the floor. It ran cold. In the midst of all that, I sat alone in a closet. At the epicenter of that astounding world, salvation was found in the arms of the lady who folds the towels.
Oh, Mimi, I'm clapping with everybody. And I want you to know, I can tell everyone here tonight is here for you and they love you so much. We're your Portland circle. And I hope you can feel it a little bit. Absolutely gorgeous reading.
And I can feel it.
I hope so. We're all here. I promise you the people you want to be here are here. So that's such a great section to read. And it's, you know, symbolic of the whole book because you as the speaker are in and out of this new realm. You know what I mean? The rest of your life. And so I think a good place to start, especially for readers who are unfamiliar with both your work or the topic, might be to give us a kind of, you know, micro history or even just a few steps that you went through from the time you thought things were one reality to the time you discovered, you know, this was his first psychotic break, the time you discovered another reality was present in your life. Could you just speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, you know, it's so elusive, the crazy. It's hard to find. I've said a million times, it's like trying to hold Jell-O. You just, in your hands, it's just impossible. Nick was born and he was the perfect kid. You know, he was smart and he was handsome and he had a big heart and he was an amazing artist and he was a leader. And it was just, I fell so in love with the idea of what his life was going to be, which I guess we all do with all our children.
Right.
But we went for years, you know, the first 15 years of his life were just sitting back and looking at this incredible human being that we were gifted. And when he became a teenager, problems started happening. And, you know, if you were to make the list of the red flags for serious mental illness and the list of normal teenage behavior, you'd have virtually the same list. They're all mercurial and nuts and moody and impulsive. And so we looked at him and we thought, okay, so this is what teenager is. But there were little signs that certainly in retrospect I can see at that point, because those red flags on the list are the same as what everybody was doing. They were hard to identify. It wasn't until he was in his later teens and he stopped functioning and being, not functioning, but stopped being as accomplished as he was, started having problems with things. And then there was a suicide attempt. There was a cutting of the wrist. And so it was at that point that we knew something was wrong, but really it was years before I realized it was serious mental illness, and sometime after that before I accepted it.
I hear you. I want to throw in there, you can put questions for Miriam in the Q&A box, and I'll keep an eye on those, but we're going to chat just for a little bit, and with your permission, if that's okay with you guys. I know what you mean, because some of the indicators and behaviors happen with teens or troubled teens, quote unquote, across the spectrum of teen existence. So that's a tough thing to just figure out at what point, you know, does reality literally shift. But so I'm really, it's very moving to me that you mention that every time you talk about this, that there are two lists, and in one reality, the list would look pretty similar, because teens going through difficulty versus teens going through difficulty, that's a hard thing to parse out. Yeah, I'm really, it's very evident in your book too, that you're just living your life, and at some point it's like, oh, this is bigger. But it's not easy. It's not easy to figure out.
No.
There's a thing that you know personally for me that I'm so in love with about you and your son, and that is that you are both visual artists, and then as I have met you, you move toward the page, toward writing. Mm-hmm. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the relationship between the piece of drawing paper or the canvas or the white of the page for writing. Like, do you think about the relationship? Like, what moved you toward words when I know you love painting? What you recently just posted a thing on social media that just said, I love paint. I mean, it's so deep in your bones. Like, what moved you toward storytelling, do you think?
You know, this story was so complicated and so many moving parts and so many pieces. And I felt like I wanted to, not that I wanted, but it was important to me to put it out there into the world in a way where there was very little room for interpretation. And I think that's what moved me to words. And also, I don't even know where I would begin to make a painting of this story. You know, maybe later in my life I will. But for me, you know, I honestly don't separate out those things. For me, it's always been the act of making stuff. Uh-huh. And so, I mean, I've told you how I paint over old paintings. I mean, I don't really care. I'm very detached once I even finish a painting. If I don't feel like stretching a new canvas or I don't have one around, I'll just roll over it and paint. Yeah. Which something a lot of people find appalling. But to me, it feels very natural because my relationship to the piece kind of ends in its live form when I'm done painting. Yeah. But so for me, I started writing. You know, writing is a lot harder, I think, than painting, but maybe because I haven't been doing it for 60 years. But it involved a different kind of specific. Oh, I can't say the word. You know,
specificity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And it took a longer time, but I did it in a very visual way. I wrote and wrote and wrote, and as I wrote it, I would think of other things, and I would write it down on Post-its and stick them on the walls, and you know, move them around. And so I did it in a very visual way. But I don't feel like it's that different at all, and it's very interesting with Nick because Nick has started painting again for the first time in many, many years. And we're all really excited. For long years, all he did was draw in children's coloring books as an adult. And I finally figured out that he had that physical need to be drawing, but whatever was happening in his brain, he couldn't bring it from there. So he found it on the coloring books. But, and the interesting thing that's happened is his paintings at this point, up until a few weeks ago, were just, he would take canvases and he would write words on them with a Sharpie. And it just seemed to be so interesting that I became a writer and then he started writing words on canvases. And I don't think that there's any conscious connection between the two, but I do think that there's some sort of visceral, unconscious connection between Nick and me where we're doing that. I'm trying to segue him back into actually painting. So now what we're doing is I go to his apartment and I hang out with him, and I take the paintings with the words and I do painting color designs and things on them. So I'm just segueing him back into it. It's been really thrilling.
I love hearing that. We need to have a private conversation about a couple of people I know who cover canvases with words. Over wine, we need to have this conversation. I want to ask you another thing as I'm watching questions load up. So we're going to go to some of those questions sooner than later. But so let me see if this resonates for you if I ask it like this. When you and I have talked about this more than once, about how you can't really separate out emotions like joy, rage, desire, confusion, despair, ecstasy. Like at some point, if you're living a full life, those emotions come in a swirl. And when we try to separate them out, it's a little bit false. It's a little bit, you know, us pretending the other things don't exist. Your experience with Nick meant that you had to either give up on joy forever or figure out how to let those complex emotions happen simultaneously. Do you know what I mean? Can you
Really?
talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, rage, it's funny with me because, I mean, certainly, and it's in the book, there's plenty of moments of rage. But as a person, you know, the way I'm wired, rage isn't that big a deal. It isn't a place where I spend a lot of time, because I've had people around me in my life, and I've seen it in Nick, where it's been so destructive and so pointless that it's just something that I move through quickly. I don't stay there. It alchemizes into something else, into some of the other things that you were talking about. But this experience has brought me more in touch with that feeling that everything is all part of one thing. But there was a very specific point a few years in where what I had to do for the first few years, where I was in crisis mode all the time, was just tamp everything else down and just function, just get through the day and take care of everybody. And a few years in, we got to a point where things were more or less stabilized. And I realized, okay, this is okay. And at one point I thought, okay, this is it. I'll just stay here and wait to die. And then, I don't know, there was just a day where I went, no, you know, why should I not have joy? I get to have joy. And I just decided to let it be part of things. And now, all the years later, there's levels of joy and like hummingbird wings, little twists of joy that nobody else can even tune into. That, like, I'll have a conversation with Nick where he'll say something to me and nobody in the world will get it, but I'll call Lucy or Rose and I'll tell them, I'll recount the conversation to him, and it wouldn't sound like anything to anyone else, and either will burst into tears or will start laughing hysterically. So everything's amplified. And so when this is something that I firmly believe, when you allow yourself the depth and the reality of the grief, you gift yourself the equal depth and deepness of joy.
Jesus Christ, that's...
It works.
What, we must pause for a moment while Lydia balls her face off. that, the one depth gives you the other depth.
Yeah.
That's right. This is partly why we were supposed to meet each other.
Absolutely.
That is right. Oh, secular amen. That was gorgeous. Sorry to invoke Jesus. That has nothing to do with anything, but God, that was so good. There's a piece of artwork that you made that our mutual friend Jen Pasteloff gifted me, which is a painting of your children. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Of course I do.
But they don't. So this is unlike any painting of anyone's children you've ever seen in your life. And I love it, like in ways I can't even fully describe. Mimi, can you tell them what's in the painting?
Yeah, it's a painting I took of a bunch of the kids running around out in the grass out here in the country, and it was just so beautiful and so bucolic, and it just looked like the perfect world. And so I took the picture, and we loved the picture, and then I thought of doing a painting, and I started working on it. Of course, my paintings are all about fires, explosions, extreme acts of nature like tornadoes and volcanoes and things like that. And there was just no way I was going to paint this bucolic sort of, scene of these kids in a field. So the painting is called Playing with Fire, and it still looks really beautiful. It's not jarring in how it looks, but if you look a little closer, one kid is literally playing with fire. Another kid is has a magnifying glass and is burning a bunch of ants on the ground. Another kid is running with a knife, or running with scissors, I think, a scissors or a knife. Yeah, everybody's doing something horrifying and frightening. And when I painted the painting, I really thought it was funny. I was amused with myself. Now I look back on it, and to me, it's everything in one picture. It's everything that I love in one picture. I've always been in love with fire. I've always been in love with that tipping point. Actually, you probably can't see it, but if you look behind me, there's a black and white picture that's right behind me in the middle. And that's a picture that I found when I was 16 years old in the library in one of those Time Life books on photography. And it's a woman who jumped out of the window to her suicide.
Yeah.
And the picture was caught by a journalist who got the picture. And so you see the people walking on the street below. You see the woman right above their heads. You see the people sitting in the diner eating their food. And that, to me, that moment, all I've been doing the rest of my life is painting that moment over and over again. And and now I'm admitting it to the world, I saw that and I didn't know that I'd be able to find that picture ever again. There's no internet. And I tore it out of the book in the library and folded it up and put it in my pocket and stole it.
As one should.
And that's the picture that's been on my desk above my art making place for 50 years. Since
You just said it. It's because you used the phrase tipping point.
Yeah, it's because to me that's it, that angle of repose, that moment right before something happens.
That's right.
When it's inevitable, but it hasn't happened yet. That's what fascinates me. And with the kids running, it was that moment too. It's like everybody's running and everything's beautiful and they're all playing with crazy things and it's dangerous and maybe it's going to be okay and maybe it's going to be terrible. We just got to let the frames play out. I love that moment.
It's kind of like right now, Mimi, which is why I asked you about it. And another kind of question I have is about that. Everything you just described is both beautiful about your life and your children and your art, but also we're at a tipping point now, as we are historically over and over again. And I kind of want to ask, do you think people whose lives have been non-normative maybe have a skill set that helps us in the present tense? Do you think that, or am I overgeneralizing?
As a matter of fact, I wrote an article that's somewhere, I can't think of where, which is how having a son with schizophrenia prepared me for the pandemic. Oh, it's in, I want to say crazy, I'll think of it. Anyway, and it's true, and it's interesting because it's twofold. It's not only me, because I spend my every minute now, every waking minute, basically waiting for the shoe to drop, because that's what having a son with schizophrenia is. So I kind of live in that moment of suspended animation. Every time the phone rings, I jump a little bit. I mean, it's not as bad as it once was, but it'll always be there. And so for me, I'm very good at just being in the moment and contending with the catastrophe at hand and not worrying about the bigger horrible picture. which has its good and bad things. I mean, it's really the embodiment of the old 60s thing that I grew up with, of be here now, which really is always the only place we ever are and the only place we ever have. And so this kind of trauma forces you into that. But you know, it's interesting because for Nick, this whole thing isn't bothering him one bit. He knows about it. I was out of town. I was in New York in March when this all started. And when I came back, I was really worried to tell him everything. And you know, he is somebody who is clearly the embodiment of living in the moment and dealing with what's at hand. And I joke with the girls that he has a sprinkling of OCD. So I doubt that he's touched a doorknob in 10 years. So we don't have to talk to him about germs or touching things, and he doesn't go near people, and he just stays in the moment. You know, often I have to remind him there aren't restaurants open. We can't go to restaurants, but he just deals with what's at hand. And I mean, yes, of course, we have to think about the bigger picture. That's what this is all about now. But I think in terms of an operating mode for all of us now, we need to be in the moment.
Yes, and the things we could learn from people who experience their bodies and the world differently. I don't know why we're turning to the news so often when we could be learning how to become differently. It's one of the things I love about reading your book. It reminds me of that the skill sets aren't where we've placed them. And the things to learn aren't where we've placed them and validated them and sensationalized them. But I want to ask you a couple more things, and then I'm going to get to these people who have questions. So one is, tell me some of your favorite things about Nick.
His dimple on his cheek when he smiles. He has a real, one of those smiles that just rocks the world. And not just my world. Sales ladies, doctors, nurses, everybody falls in love with him. He's incredibly charming, but he's funny, and we still have our laughs and our jokes and our irony and our sarcasm, and that's great. But you know, the single biggest thing to me is when Nick was a little boy, and you know, little boys can tend to be sometimes kind of harsh or cruel or flippant about things. He always had his heart on his sleeve, and he always was compassionate. He always had this empathy for others. Now, schizophrenia is a disease that pretty much takes away empathy. You know, it's part of what it does is it takes away a person's ability to step outside of themselves and even consider what another person's experience is.
Yeah.
But Nick has such an intrinsic goodness that hasn't been touched at all by the schizophrenia. You know, schizophrenia is arguably one of, or the worst mental illness. It certainly is one that manifests itself in ways that are ugly and frightening and horrible and violent. I mean, we have to be honest about these things. It is. And my boy's intrinsic goodness, schizophrenia couldn't touch it. It hasn't changed a bit. And that gives me peace, and that lets me know that who he is and his essence has not been disrupted. It may have been hidden, it may have been walled off, but it has not been disrupted. And maybe one day it will be excavated. Now I'm going to start crying.
Well, good, because that's my entire goal for the evening, is to make you cry like you made me cry. Also, though, the fact that he makes art is an expressive form of, in a way that you guys have that in common in some ways. Mm-hmm. Not in some ways, you guys have that in common.
Yeah. Yeah.
This one's a little harder, although I think you can handle it. Can you tell me some things you like about yourself?
Sure. It's not that hard for me.
That's why I knew.
I like that I'm really strong. I like that I'm determined. I like that I'm a good painter, and now I'm a good writer. I like that. And I'm proud that I'm a good mother. I'm proud of being a good mother. Though I do think, I've had a lot of people ask me through these interview things, oh, what are you most proud of? Intimating, oh, you're this super mom. And honestly, I think if you're going to bring children into the world, the least you can be is a good mother. Like, that's kind of the starting point. I don't think that anybody deserves any brownie points for being a good mother. That's what you're supposed to be. But I am proud of that, and it is something about me that I like. And I also like a lot that writing this book, that my children becoming adults, that this experience from Nick, with Nick, has taken me to task and forced me into some really uncomfortable corners where I've had to get honest and get real with myself and admit to things and apologize to things and become a better person, become a more whole, a more integrated, and a more, I hate saying this word, but authentic, like just who I am. And it was uncomfortable and it was hard. And I like that that's happening. I like that I'm in my 60s and I feel like I'm just starting.
That's right. One of my last questions was going to be, so I'm 57 and I think you're 65?
I'll be 65 in October.
So 64. Is this a great time to be alive or what? Even though it's like the worst also, but.
Yeah, I've been saying for certainly the last few months, but actually since the last 3.5 years, it's like, he fucked up my old age. Why did this have to happen? I was ready for this great old age, and now I have to worry about the world falling apart. But I have faith. And yes, it's the best. I have never been so on fire creatively as I am right now. I'm painting, I thought, okay, now I'm going to be a writer. Maybe I won't want to paint anymore. I have like a million ideas to paint. And what I've been doing now is I've been painting because this is such a hard time. I mean, none of us know what to do. I can't quite let myself get into painting big epic paintings because I'm too overwhelmed by what's happening in the world. I don't know what to make of it. So I've gone micro and I'm painting these very detailed, smaller paintings of just amazing, beautiful things in nature that I love. And something like the night when I post late at night, I love paint. I'm sitting there, probably 2 glasses of wine in, and I'm using little teeny brushes. I'm always the big messy painter. Now I can paint in a tuxedo. I sit and I'm using little teeny 000 brushes and I'm painting like a sea squid or something. And it's basically pointillism. It's basically, I'm just dots of colors, and it becomes like this beautiful, blissful meditation of just dots of colors. Oh, paint, I love you so much. And it's the best. And they're pretty little paintings, and that's what I'm going to paint until I figure out what to make of the world.
I love it. And just my classic reminder that I can't seem to stop letting come out of my face. The world has always been on fire, but sometimes we admit it and sometimes we don't.
Yeah, you're right.
So more people appear to be looking at it and admitting it right now. So that's to the good, probably.
You see right over my shoulder there, that circle looks like a butterfly. That's one of the little ones I'm working on now. It's called the cooling earth. And it's all the mantles in the inside of the earth and the fire outside. It's exactly what I've been thinking about.
Love it. I love you so much. Okay, I'm going to let some other people in, even though I want it to just be a love fest with you, Mimi, just me and you. But it's not, apparently. These other people are here. So another beloved person to me, Anne Falkowski, wants to know, were you able to make art when things were in such upheaval and crisis periods? She also thought your reading was incredibly complicated and also beautiful. And she loved the younger you being spun and then needing time to stabilize and wondering if this was a feeling that Rose felt too. But mostly she wants to know, could you make art during the times where you were, just upheaval, crisis, spun out?
I'm kind of a worker bee, so yes, but it took different forms because, I make art and I show my art in a gallery, but I also had a business where I paint murals so I have to paint all day, every day. It's what I do. There were times when getting drunk at night seemed like a way better idea than painting. But basically I kept painting, you know, it was a thing like painting the little squid. It's just, since I could hold something in my hand, it was a paintbrush. And so it's just like, it's the thing that I know how to do. Now, I'm not saying I was painting good art, but yeah, I was painting. Yeah.
I'm often saying, if I'm not writing, I'm in my worst mental health situation of all. That writing for me, and a little bit drawing too, is what keeps me sane. So the times of my life when I've not done it or let go of it have been to my own detriment, for sure. It's probably.
Yeah, you know, back to Anne also, the thing is, sometimes it would overwhelm me and a period of time would go by. I mean, because, you know, we had brain tumors, we had, you know, smashed heads, we had, you know, it was bad. Every time in my life where I've taken time off of painting, you know, weeks or whatever, where something has gotten in the way or I've gotten distracted, when I get back to the canvas and I sit down and I start working, there's always this just exquisite moment of, oh yeah,
Yep.
that's who I am.
Yep.
Now I remember.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
I'm back. That's who I am. It's and it's like it centers you. It's exactly that. Otherwise you're lost.
So Betsy Doyle White wanted you to know that this is an incredible book, which we all agree with. And she says her son is 38 and that they've been on this journey with him for 20 years, a similar journey. And though life right now for her is generally stable in their family, how do you think about the long-term future for Nick's care and your family involvement? Like, how would you say the story of it going forward based on what you've lived with so far?
Well, if I get to write this story, he wakes up one morning cured. Since I don't get to write this story, the way, you know, I think that they're actually, that possibility is there on the horizon with everything else. But since it's not my choice to write, you know, I'm sure she would relate to this. The thing that all of us mothers agonize about is what is going to become of them when we're dead. And I'm really lucky and unusual in that I know that his three sisters will take care of him. I don't even have to ask them about it. I know it. And so at least that one thing I don't have to worry about. I mean, we set up a special needs trust and we, you know, we've done, Craig and I have done the things that we need to do, but I don't think for 1 minute, I don't worry for 1 minute. And I'm so grateful to those three girls for that I know he will be loved and cared for, because that's the horror, because who else is going to do it if not you?
I know, I saw in a couple of other interviews where you said you didn't want it to be true that your son would be locked alone in a room with the care facilities that are out there right now. You wanted him to have a life as fully human as possible. And so you made the narrative go there, like, no matter what it took. I so admired that. I think partly that was in HuffPo. Fanciness, you're in all the fancies.
How did that happen?
Because you, I told you it was in you. MC wants you to know that the cover is gorgeous, like gorgeous, gorgeous, and very James Dean a little bit. And can you talk a little bit about the cover concept and where that comes from?
Yeah, that is a self-portrait that Nick did when he was 16. And, you know, I was going to be a visual, everybody said to me, oh, well, you're going to design the cover of the book. Actually, everybody except the writers that I knew who said to me, forget it. Nobody's going to let you have any input about the cover of the book. So that's what I was sort of expecting. And I didn't want to design the cover. But then somehow the wonderful people at Turner Publishing were very interested in my input. And everybody was really excited about this self-portrait and wanted to use it. So I, at first, was a little afraid of putting Nick's image out there like that. But I talked about it with him and he was into it. And so I gave it to them and I said, yeah, do it. And so that's what they came up with, using his painting. And now, of course, I look at it and I think it couldn't have been anything else.
Yeah, I think that too. And it's also, I mean, I don't want to overstate this if it creeps you out, but it's kind of an homage to his talent and brilliance and inner beauty. Like, that's an amazing piece of artwork.
And it's also prescient in that you see everything's not okay.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, I
know?
agree. The more I look at, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
But also just gorgeous piece of art, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Kimberly Boone wants to know if you can talk about the kinds of concerns you had around Nick's privacy and, you know, protecting Nick and Nick's vulnerability and stuff like that.
It was tough, and it continues to dog me, and I hope I've done the right thing. There are a lot of things that aren't in the book. There are a lot of things that I've never shared with anyone walking the earth, because there have been some things that have just been so awful that I can't speak them. But and I realize that this book exposes Nick in a lot of ways that maybe if he did wake up tomorrow cured, he wouldn't be too thrilled with. But I feel like, first of all, if that happened and he hated me for doing it, I'll take it, because it would mean he's cured. But I feel that the greater good, the greater importance is the story, and the story being in the world and people going through this, having access to it. And I really think that looking at the book, I exposed more of my own foibles than anyone else's, because those
Agreed.
are mine to expose.
Yep.
And I was very careful with how I portrayed Nick and the things that I said. And he knows about the book, and he knows what it's about. He hasn't read it because he doesn't really have the focus to sit down and read a book. But it's there for him to read if he ever wants to read it, and I'll take the heat. And as far as what I exposed about everybody else, my daughters and my husband all read the book and signed off on it. And I told everybody, if there's anything you don't want in there, I'll take it off.
One of the questions, let me go find it. Oh, from Alan Feldman.
Who I know. We're not related, but I've known him his whole life.
So the book isn't about Craig, nor is it by Craig. And the book isn't about your daughters exactly, nor is it written by your daughters. But can you give us just some, you know, a snapshot of Craig's journey? I mean, if you wanted to write a book about Craig's journey, you would have written a book about Craig's journey. But how did he arrive at his understanding with Nick and the family and you? If there anything you could say in that direction.
Well, as you know, having been at the helm of the table when we were the last go round of workshopping the book, the feedback I got was, Mimi, your husband isn't in here. We don't understand what's going on. And I had to really go back in and create that, because again, I was being careful to not tell other people's stories, but I also, in all honesty, was a little scared of exposing my own story of the evolution of our marriage through this. And, but I had to, because there was no way to write it without it. And, you know, I think that the book actually does lay out his journey pretty well. And he and Nick were incredibly close. You know, as when Nick was a child, we used to say, oh, they're like Sean Lennon and John Lennon. I mean, they were just intertwined like this. And for Craig, this has been excruciatingly painful to lose his son, because in a way you're losing a person, and actually in kind of there's a cruel joke aspect to this disease, because your child is taken away from you, but they're not dead, and you can't grieve them as dead, and they're standing right in front of you, flesh and blood and alive, and you don't know what to do with this grief. And I think it's much harder for men, because we're more physically, viscerally attached to them. I mean, we had
and no one in American culture, and in some ways this is extrapolatable globally, but very much in American culture, we don't teach men how to have feelings outside of a very narrow narrative where they have to be a kind of man that kills the feminine inside themselves. So
I mean, his journey is his journey, and maybe one day he'll write a book about his journey, but it's been really damn hard. I think it's harder on men than women, and harder on men with sons, because they don't know what to do with it.
There's no, where is there to look? What is there to, it's partly why I also want our beloved friend and brilliant writer Daniel Elder to finish his book so he can write from son to mother on topics related to.
Our beloved Daniel Elder is somebody who doesn't fall in the category of not knowing what to do with those feelings.
No, that's why we need his book. Hurry up, Daniel.
Yeah, we're waiting.
Get on that. Jacqueline Madsen wants to know, has Nick ever worked with an art therapist?
No.
Do you have thoughts about that?
No, I mean, it would seem sort of like a redundancy. I mean, it never occurred to me. I suppose I wouldn't not do it. Maybe I'll think about it now. Never once occurred to me. It's like, if you live in a restaurant, would you like go to a restaurant? You know what I mean? It's just like, it's so like woven into our lives. It never occurred to me that there'd be somebody out there who could offer him something that didn't already exist in our family, but maybe that's really stupid of me. So I'll have to look into it.
Couple more that are just from me. I love your daughters, so just tell them they have an auntie out here that just loves them to pieces and always will the rest of their lives. How are they feeling about this whole thing?
You know, they're very, very excited and proud of me, and it feels so good.
What it looks like.
They love me so much, and it's just like I just bask in it. I'm so grateful for that. And so they're just like, go, great, they're great. You know, Rose recently read it again, and she said to me, oh, I seem like such a horrible little brat. And I said, Rose, you seem in pain, and everybody can see that. And I told her how in our book group, everybody loved her so much.
Please, Rose, please believe me.
Listen to Lydia.
Yeah, please believe me. It's a beautiful part of the story, and we all fell in love with you.
Yeah, I mean, they're just the best. I mean, I'm the best kids. I'm the luckiest person in the world. A lot of shitty stuff has happened, but within the shitty, like really bad stuff has happened, but within the scenarios of really bad stuff, it's always been the best possible scenario. So that makes me think I'm lucky. Plus, there's just an abundance of love, and what else can you ask for, right?
Almost nothing.
Yeah.
Well, I have to ask you this because now you're on a roll. I need to know what paintings you're working on next, which you spoke to a little bit, but you're working on another book, or you have an idea for another book, right?
I started, yes. I'm working now, so I'm doing paintings of the natural world because that's the only thing that makes sense to me right now.
Got it.
Our human world I just don't know what to do. So that's what I'm going to keep doing, is just paintings of the natural world for a while. And as far as writing, yes, I was inspired by a fantastic writer who I know, who recently published a collection of short stories called Verge. And I looked at how that thing was formatted, and I mean, that book in and of itself, I think it's your best work. I mean, it knocked me off my chair. But the best short story collections are not really a collection, but a mosaic. And I have a lot that I took out of the book because there was just too much. And I'm starting to rework those as short stories, but third person fiction. So they're based in truth, but it's fiction. And that's,
love it. You know I do.
Yeah, and you inspired it, so that's what I'm doing.
Love that idea. Well, we're like 5 minutes to 7. Does anyone want to put I have to ask this question before we leave thing in the Q&A? Because if not, I'm going to ask Miriam one more thing. I don't think I see a desperate, have to ask it question.
Hey, listen, anybody can email me. So far, I answer everything anybody emails me, so just reach out.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one more thing. And this comes at me sometimes, that's why I'm asking you. Do you think what you wrote is brave?
It's only brave in what I expose about myself, and not even necessarily brave. Now, brave's not even the word. It's not brave. You know, when I sat down to write this, I made a decision. I realized that the only way this was going to be anything of any meaning was if I was truthful about it.
Yeah.
And so I just got it on paper. I have to admit that there have been a few moments in the last few months where I've been like, you know, all the people in the neighborhood are going to know what was going on all those years. But no, I don't think it's brave. I mean, we're art makers, right? I mean, you're the one who gave me permission to talk about making art. So now I will talk about making art, because I spent my first 63 years refusing to discuss the act of making art. It's what we do, right? That's the thing that we do. And so if it's going to be bullshit, then why do it? You know, I mean, then let's just crochet doilies or something else. If we're going to make something and call it art, it's got to be real. And so then that means that's the criteria. So it's like saying to a shoemaker who made a really amazing shoe, do you feel like that was brave? No, I just made a good fucking shoe. And so that's what I think. Okay?
Yes, I love you so much.
I love you too. Are you kidding?
I love you so much. I do believe Julie will come and give us an what do you call it? Not an
outro.
Outro-duction. But thank you so much for joining us just from Mimi and me. It was such a delight. I love you so much.
Thank you, Lydia. I do love you so.
Thank you both so much. Thanks to everyone for joining us for tonight's event. It was such a pleasure to host both of you and to welcome all of you to the virtual space. Please consider purchasing a copy of He Came In With It by visiting us at powells.com. While there, be sure to check out our lineup of other upcoming virtual events. We look forward to seeing you at another one of our events soon. Take care until then. And as I said, there will be a recording of this available on our YouTube channel if anybody missed any pieces of it and they want to see the whole thing. Thanks so much. Goodbye.